let's kick it off. Tell us about yourself. Who are you? What do you do? And what are you all about?
Sure. So I am Michael Perez. I'm the founder and trainer and facilitator for Willful Steps. That's my business. In terms of who I am married 14 years now. Sorry, 11 years now. Together 14 years. Let me get that wrong. Father of three beautiful boys, 22-year-old, a 9-year-old, and a 5-year-old. Interestingly, my 22-year-old has literally just left for a month in Europe and the UK. So it's the furthest he's been away from me physically ever. So I'm trying to be really cool about it.
Yes.
Oh, sorry?
Guys are trying to be.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, at the airport, he was just like, "Oh, can I see him?" I was like, "Yeah." He's like, "Do you want a hug?" I was like, "Oh, if you want to have a hug, I'll have a hug. We can hug. If you want to have a hug."
And then all comes back. Yeah. Waving to him at the airport as he takes off. He can't see you through the little window.
Precisely. So, yeah, definitely put on a brave face, which I'll tell him about later, and I think he'll probably think it's absolutely hilarious. But yeah, so father of three boys. There's a sizable gap between the 22-year-old and the 9-year-old. I like to say, the trick is to pace yourself. But his mother is not my wife, so he's from a previous relationship. He's probably the most pragmatic and sensible person that I know, which is really wonderful. In terms of the business, I'm a neurodiversity coach and trainer. So that's
how did you get into that?
Yeah, the business is called Willful Steps. It's a very new venture for me. And it's a bit of an interesting origin story because how it came about was very much unintentional. Like I've coached people for a long time. I've loved leadership coaching and leadership mentoring. It's such a passion of mine. And what happened a few years ago when our 9-year-old was in daycare, we got told by and we were at a beautiful daycare, and they genuinely were the most lovely team, and their empathy and their interest in their children was so obvious. And the reason I mentioned that is because they said to us, we actually think William could have ADHD. And despite knowing how beautiful and how wonderful and caring they are, my first knee-jerk response was to say something along the lines of, "Who the hell do you think you are?" Right? How dare you? Right? Because that's obviously an attack on me as a parent. That's obviously
as a parent.
Yeah, exactly. And I look back at that now, and I'm so glad that I had that response, because it's such a typical response, right? Yeah. And it's at the same time, it's about as logical as telling mum and dad off because your kid got the flu. Right. Yeah. Like, it makes no sense, but it feels like the most personal of things. And that's a really big theme with ADHD and neurodiversity, not just with my experience, with everyone's experience. And so over time, that feedback became quite a regular talking point. And from daycare, the second room to the third room to the fourth room to pre-primary, and and it just became unavoidable, So having had that kind of very emotive, personalized, attacking response, best defense is good offense. It got to the stage where we were like, okay, we can't just put our heads in the sand about this. And I. Being a coach, having worked with adults, I realized that I actually had nothing in my back pocket for an ADHD child. Like I had nothing. I didn't know there was some. I didn't even know what I did. I didn't even know what I knew, let alone the stuff I didn't know. Right. So I decided that we needed to support him, we needed to figure out what that support would look like. So I did some research. And it blew my mind. It was fascinating, and so I started an accreditation as a neurodiversity coach, and then during that process is when I discovered that I have ADHD.
Wow! So was it like any particular question that was being asked of your child, or you just saw the process unfold and figured, hang on, I'm ticking a lot of boxes here?
It was more the second one. It was the, because a lot of the challenge with diagnosing children, whether it's a physical illness or a emotional, neurological, psychological thing, is how do you get them to articulate? Like we've got such good use of words, but they can't put words to what they're feeling. And so a lot of it has to be observation. I hear things and I see things, right? And when you go through that list of the things that I was hearing and seeing, I was like, I was having this outer body experience and seeing me through my parents' eyes when I was in primary school, going, oh, right.
Wow.
So this runs in the family, and it does, right? There's one of the things that I like to remind people is, what makes neurodivergent children, neurodivergent parents, right? Okay. Statistically speaking, right? If you yourself are neurodivergent, it's highly likely that you're going to have a neurodivergent little skin baby. Oh, that's a terrible term. Human baby.
We'll edit that
out. Yeah. Well, the funny thing is, we got a dog recently, so fur baby has become part of our vernacular, and so
nice.
And so that's when I realized that this was my story, and that was when it's a really interesting process that you go through, especially people that are late diagnosed, right? Yeah. That is such a roller coaster, because you really have to reconcile yourself with the fact that maybe you don't even know yourself, right? Yeah. Because the mirror that you were looking at yourself in, the filter that you were looking at yourself through was wrong, right? It was woefully unfair, right? And so, I kind of think, imagine, and not that you ever could, but imagine if you just didn't realize that you had a broken ankle for a month, right? Yeah. It's almost that literal, because there's expectations, and there's KPIs, and there's structure, and all these things that are normal part of growing up, and the normal part of working, that you are that you're programmed to struggle with because of the way that your brain works. And that was a really interesting penny drop moment. And I don't think you ever stop dealing with that, right? Yeah. That's something that it's, the more you get into it, the more you think about it, the more complex that becomes. And then, you very logically start replaying or reliving some of your experiences in the past with a different perspective.
Yes.
I remember reading a book years and years ago, and this psychologist referenced the child that hears their parents, that sneaks out of their bed at nighttime and hears their parents having a heated argument. And one of the parents says, it just would have been so much easier if we hadn't had children.
Wow.
Right? Now, in that moment, for that child to hear that, oh my gosh, how crushing, right? Like that, like how devastating, right? Now, the reality is, in 20 years' time, when that child has their kids, at some point, they're going to say to their partner, it would have been easier if we didn't have kids, right?
That's what they've been learned. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. And if they're lucky, they're going to remember that conversation and go, oh, that's what they meant. They didn't mean that they hated me. They didn't mean that they didn't want me. They just meant that money is hard and capitalism sucks and double income is tough. Right. Right. Yeah. And that's the, being able to have that kind of similar moment where I'm looking back at the times I was reprimanded, the times when I didn't achieve academically to my potential, the times when I couldn't stop fidgeting, when I couldn't sit still, right? And walking away from that with my own internal struggle about what does that mean about me, that I'm so non-compliant despite my best efforts, and what does that mean, like my perspective of the people who are tasked with helping me and teaching me, because they respond to their behavior as they should, but I feel misunderstood because I can't, right?
Yeah.
And so there's so many perspectives that get messed around with that.
Yeah. And then, because what you said earlier with yourself even being diagnosed so late, I think there is so much of ADHD, which there's so many levels, and there's so much of it that could be perceived as, oh, I just twitch, like could it be so easily mistaken? And then on top of that, like I guess people do look at it as it's a bad thing or something. That's why when you were told your son or your child might have this, your first reaction was like, how dare you? It's like such a negative reaction when really it could just be a part of their personality. So do you
Definitely.
think
It is when you start to, and that's a really interesting part about the late diagnosis, is trying to remap yourself and identify what are the things that are me, what are the things that are the ADHD, right? Because I like to cook, right?
Yeah.
But I don't like to use recipes because I like to improvise.
Right. Yeah.
Is that because of my ADHD challenges with structure? Or is that because I just like to improvise when I'm cooking? Like which one is that? And there's so many other examples of you kind of go, well, where does the ADHD stop and where do I start? And it's not as simple as that, right? And so, you look at that, there are really interesting, very specific traits, right? The impulse control. So kids that need to, they think and then they say, right?
Yeah.
There's no, if it occurs to me, it's going to, in my brain, it's going to come out of my mouth, right? In that moment, right? And depending on and this is the part of it that I'm really fascinated by, because, we're very good at diagnosing young boys, right? Really good, especially when it comes to young white boys, right? People from a Western background. It gets more complicated when you add cultural influences, and it gets significantly more complicated when you add women, girls.
So
right?
Why is that? Yeah.
Because the behavior manifests differently, right? And it is such different. And the cultural thing is a really interesting conversation to kind of unpack.
Yeah.
Because and like you hear so many. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the comedian Joe Coy.
I don't know.
I haven't. No.
I'm wondering if I've said his name wrong. Doesn't matter. He's a Filipino comedian, American Filipino comedian. And one of the things that he talks about when he was growing up was the way that his friends at school could talk to their mothers, that he couldn't talk to his mother that way. And I remember that being my experience. I was in high school one time when one of my friends told his mother, and one of my Australian, white Australian friends told his mother to shut up. And I wanted to duck. I was like, oh, we're both going to get killed. Right?
Yeah.
All right. And so the reality is children from, like, boys and girls from different cultural backgrounds get raised a little bit differently. Right. And the way that kind of manifests, and when I've spoken to teachers and daycare workers that I've kind of worked with, is you'll have your Australian couple or mum or dad that drop their kids off on the first day, and they are so open, and they'll say, so this is Michael. I just want you to know that we've got a child psychologist, or we've got an OT that we're dealing with, and this is what he does, and this is how the symptoms manifest, and this is what's going on. He's going to do this, tell him to shut up and put him in the right? But when you are dealing with families, especially families that have English as a second language, right?
Yeah.
They will not take that. They will not disclose that information. Right?
So they'll keep it close to their heart, almost like a shame.
Exactly. Right. Exactly. And it definitely it feels like shame when you interact with them. It feels like there's a self-blame that kind of goes on there, or even sometimes a level of embarrassment. And so, like a don't ask, don't tell kind of situation, right? But then in terms of girls and women, their ADHD, their AUDHD, their autism, it manifests differently. We don't see the same symptoms. We just don't.
What are the differences?
So the the young boy that needs to run around to burn off the energy, that can't sit still, that's constantly fidgeting, constantly interrupting, that doesn't recognize personal space, like a lot of that impulse control, right? That is so easy to see, the impulse control, right? Whereas often with young girls, it's internalized, right? And so I spent some time with a family who had a daughter, and they couldn't get their head around the fact that their son, sorry, that's not fair. They struggled with the idea that their son was ADHD and their daughter was also ADHD, because her daughter she was so still, right? She was so introverted, right? And the when they spent time with their OT and when they spent time unpacking, it was the level of overwhelm that she had. It would make her freeze up, essentially, right? And as opposed to her brother, who had in that impulse control, who was like a cat, right, running around the house. You know, it was one of those kids you meet. If you can't see him on the ground, you look up to see if maybe it's on a shelf. and so it's the same thing. You know, there's a really brilliant child psychologist I follow on Instagram who talks very well about the 7 different types of ADHD, right? Okay. And so it's really interesting to see how that plays out. And it's a journey that we haven't even got close to the end. We've only really just beginning, because we're still kind of ironing the creases out of the way that we diagnose, because we've still, to this day, you know, we've still got people that are being late diagnosed. I was diagnosed at how old was I? 43, 42, 43, right? I've met people that are diagnosed in their 60s, right?
Wow.
So they slip through every conceivable crack their entire career. Right?
I'm really curious, Michael. With a late diagnosis, could you talk us through just what that meant to you? How did that change your personal life? How did that change your own filter of yourself? How did it change your professional life?
Sure. It's a really interesting question, because you kind of go. I went through a bit of an identity crisis, right, where I really, and it was from two different perspectives. The first thing was, where could I have been? What could I have done had I been diagnosed in primary school?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Because there was a tipping point in my life where I just kind of decided that education and I just weren't meant to be the best of friends. Like, I just didn't belong in a classroom. I couldn't learn the same way that other people learned. And the knock-on effect was, I didn't even try to go to university. I didn't even try, right? I went to TAFE. I did hospitality management, right? Because it was a good combination of running around like a maniac and some theory, right? Which is the best use of my energy. But you know, it genuinely didn't occur to me that I would make it into university. And now I look back and I'm very confident in the fact that had it been identified, had it been managed, had I been medicated, right, that trajectory would have been fundamentally different, right? But how long is a piece of string? You know, how much time do you spend in that rabbit hole of, oh, I could have, but what if, right? And so when I say that now, having gone through that period of anger and frustration and sadness and remorse, you know, and, you know, it's kind of like when people talk about, oh, in 1910, somebody spent $25,000 on X. And you kind of go, well, okay, but put that in historical context and go, oh, sure, that's like millions of dollars, right? And so one of the things that I talk a lot about with when I do talk to speeches, presentations, when I'm coaching people, is we have to look back with historical context. We can't look at 1985 through the lens of 2026, right? Because it's unfair on everybody.
Yeah. So with ADHD, because you mentioned as well, there's so many levels. Like a boy might present differently to a girl, and a different culture might present differently to another. How is it in the end diagnosed that it is ADHD, and do they always need medication, or is there other ways? And like for example, you said like fidgeting in class or whatever. How would you know that that's not just someone that's impatient or not? Like how do we finally know that this is what it is?
It's such a good question, and it's for parents. A lot of it is, what is your gut? What is your heart telling you? Are we dealing with a child? When you look at your child, is this, I'm choosing not to do what I know I need to do, or is it I'm struggling to do what I know I need to do? Right. And on some level, we always know as parents when our children are being a bit cheeky, a bit precocious, when they know they're doing the wrong thing, right? But the question is, how do I recognize when they're genuinely trying and they're struggling? And that's what you're looking for, is the struggle. Is and in terms of like from an academic results perspective, for us, my 3 boys are so smart, they're so intelligent, right? And the reality for them is they have had times where they've struggled to keep up, right, in certain pockets of their education experience. We call it spiky profiles, right? So people that have just an incredible ability and proclivity and fascination and fixation almost in maths, right?
Yeah.
But they can't draw an S the right way around.
Yeah.
Right. Or they struggle to read, but are fascinated by maps or technology, right? And so they've got some areas of brilliance and other areas of struggle, right? And it doesn't quite. You look at it and go, that's shouldn't it be like? No, it doesn't. We don't want them all up here, but maybe that should be here. Maybe we shouldn't have that variance, right? And when we see that, that's when it's like, okay, great, get some advice. Right? Look into it. Right? There are services that are available. There are people out there that are interested. That you can connect with via your GP, via OT. Right? But there's also a wealth of information online around the different ways that it can manifest. And it's important. It's important when we see that, because there is a risk, and this is my lived experience, that if it's not addressed, your child will continue to struggle academically throughout their entire educational experience.
So I'm curious, Michael, you mentioned that your kids have ADHD. How has that changed the approach in the space of education? How does it change? Like, for example, when you guys do homework or when you speak to the teachers, how's that been impacted?
It's patience, right? And it's a matter of being able to, especially because of the fact that they're on the same path that I was on, right? And there's an exercise that I do with parents and with managers where I say, what I want you to do is go away and write down a list of the 10 worst, most destructive, most annoying, most malicious actions or routines that you used to observe from your parents or from your bosses, right? Write them out. And then I want you to bring them to when we catch up, and I want you to talk me through them. And what we're going to do is we're going to write the alternative behavior. And the reason we do that exercise is because if you don't recognize that and choose those behaviors that you've observed, and if you don't choose an alternative, you are so much more likely to just repeat what was done to you.
Yeah,
right?
True.
And so I was raised in a strict Catholic African household, right? And so there were expectations. There were I'm not going to say my parents were disciplinarians, but they were very strict, right? And so having seen that, and for 3 out of 4 children, academic excellence, right? Having seen that, when I became a parent, my knee-jerk reaction was to go, "Oh, I know what Dad is. Dad is strict. Dad doesn't mess around. Dad's there when it gets serious," right?
Yeah.
And recognizing that wasn't the approach that was going to work for my boys, because that's not the approach that worked for me, right?
Yes.
And so being able to meet them where they are, not where I wish that they were, not where I want them to be, and recognizing what that ADHD experience means throughout the course of the day. Right. I spend a lot of time talking to parents about that that behavioral, emotional drop off. Right. That first half hour when you get home from school, they need to resettle. They need to calm down. They need to have space. Right. Because chances are they've been masking all day. And that's a whole lot of effort. That's a whole lot of blood sugar that's been burnt, right? And then they get back and they're exhausted. And then we jump straight into homework, and we wonder why we end up in downtown Bosnia, World War II. Right? And it's having that strategic approach to the day. That's the difference.
Yeah.
Right.
But you mentioned that you obviously had a late diagnosis, so your parents did not recognize anything in you, but you had quite very academic, brothers and sisters and things like that. Is it something that they would have just gone, no, he's just being a sport brat, or he's just not interested, or, again, was that a cultural thing? Because I do believe, like, culturally, some parents would be like, no, you're not allowed to have that. That's my time.
You're depressed. You're not. Get over it.
Right? Just work harder. If you want something to be better, you just have to do it harder. Right?
Yeah. You're not applying yourself, Michael.
Exactly. Right? Do what they're doing. Just all you need to do is sit down for 15, just do an hour. Right. And so it definitely was, and I hold no bitterness to my parents for this, because they didn't know what they didn't know. Right. Yeah. But it definitely was a case of, and it even just makes sense mathematically. If I'm raising all my children the same and 75% of them, it's working a treat, right? Nice. It'd be different if it was the other way around.
Yeah.
Then you probably change your approach. But surely the issue is Michael.
And then I'm also curious, because your child was in kindy or daycare. So how old were they when a teacher picked up on?
So daycare would have been probably three or four.
Did they say what it was that made them associate the behavior with being?
Were they seeing flags?
Yeah, absolutely. And so one of the
what were they?
It's a great question. One of the classic flags was that the inability to sit still on the mat during story time, right? Like the challenge with following instructions with more than one step, right? And so that was some of the behavioral stuff that they were noticing. So he just really let me clarify. If the book was about dinosaurs, however, laser-like attention, right, could almost retell you the story, right? But if it wasn't something that he was interested in, if it didn't have that novelty attached to it, just really struggled to stay still. And so it can sound so innocuous, right? But when it's something that you when they live and breathe that, they see that day after day, they kind of go, no, this is a thing. This is an observed behavior. It's repeated. It's been a consistent theme. The challenge is, they're just so cute and so charming. They're so easy for them to slip under the radar. And that's what happens when you have well-developed social skills, but struggle with impulse control. They can be very entertaining, and in those kind of Cosby Show moments, you can miss it.
Yeah.
So before you were diagnosed, or before your child was diagnosed, you were not working in this field. Were you in hospitality or totally living a different life?
No, it's a good question. I was working at the time for the water board, for the water corporation. So I was.
Oh wow.
So and I was a training facilitator and team manager for them, and I was also doing my coaching for my business kind of on the outside of that, weekends and evenings. And so I was in that space, just nowhere near neurodiversity, nowhere near that.
Wow.
So you were doing leadership coaching, nothing to do with neurodiversity, just out of your own passion. And then you've transitioned now into full neurodiversity coaching. And so is it like helping parents, talking them through what their children are going through? Is that kind of what you're working with?
So what Wilfred's able to do, I'm partnering with businesses that work with children, so schools, OSH programs, primary schools, high schools, volunteer associations like the I just work with the Armidale Police Rangers, which is kind of like police cadets,
Nice.
music schools, and so people that have people in the business that are working with children, right? So the idea there is, because that I think for me that was the gap that was missed in my experience was. Schools, primary schools, OSH programs, daycares that didn't have the infrastructure, didn't have the knowledge to be able to best support neurodiverse children, right? And so I think that there's never going to be the perfect amount of support for neurodiverse families, right? But I think the need for schools and for the organizations that work with children, the need for them to close their gap is a huge, should be a huge priority for us. And I don't think it is as much. And that's the space that I kind of occupy.
And that's what I wanted just to touch on, Michael. I'm really curious to dive deeper into some of the challenges that you find working with some of these organizations, where we were, where we are, and ideally where we would like to be.
Sure. So the biggest challenge that I encounter is this idea that there are things in the world that are static, right? Especially when it comes to research, right? So there's if there's a Piaget, I can't remember Sydney Piaget. There's a body of work that was done by like a groundbreaking child psychologist, psychologist and researcher Piaget, who, and his work has been is core to the way that we look at education, right? And it's kind of centered around the 4 phases of development that children go through, right? And that's to this day that research is still core to the way that education is taught. My 22-year-old is doing primary school education at university, and it's core to his most of that's the field. One of the key filters that all of the assignments, all of the work they put through is, okay, great, have we factored in those 4 phases of development that every child goes through? They're perfectly linear 4 phases, right? Now what that does not allow for is that spiky profile that we talked about. Right? It simply does not allow for the idea that a kid that is sitting at a 7 or 8 out of 10 out of maths might be a 3 out of 10 in English or in writing or in sport, right? Because across all buckets, you just go 1, 2, 3, 4, right? And so the interesting thing with that is there has been that research has been superseded, right? There is research out there to show that where and how that misses the mark, but it's not research that gets used, right?
Not applied.
Right, exactly. We're still working with Piaget's work, right? And I can't stress enough, I'm not anti-Piaget, right?
Yeah.
There's some incredible work. Like there's so much that we know now because of his work that we didn't know before, but those 4 phases of development, they do not work for neurodivergent children. They just don't, right? And because we are working in that Piaget space, we've got nothing for the kids that don't meet that mold.
So what are the barriers? Is PJ too entrenched in the current system?
It is.
And we're too invested?
No, it is, in my opinion, is way too entrenched. It's for it's so much of what we do is in education is put through that filter. Like it's so core to the way that teachers are taught and the way that we build our classrooms, the way that we build our curriculums, the way that we build our support structures, and what it means is kids get missed. And when you look at the opposing research, which is being able to identify the social skills, being able to identify those spiky profiles, being able to, and then we're talking about multiple pieces of research as opposed to just one, right? What we realize is our staff, our classrooms are understaffed, right? Because we need more bums, we need more people in those rooms to be able to meet those kids where they are, right? and in that regard, it's like the most immediate issue is funding, right? But then once you've got the funding, it's being able to close that gap, that knowledge gap, to get people to collaborate in the way that our kids need. And then there's another step to it, because one of the pieces of work that I'm doing at the moment is onboarding. How do we onboard our families into our schools? Because one of the most critical relationships in a child's education is the relationship that their parents have with their teacher and with their school, right?
And as you said, breaking down those walls, especially in ethnic families, to be open to the ideas that their children might need a diagnosis or an adjustment. And how do you break those walls down?
And taking away the shame of it as well.
Yeah, exactly. It's one of those things where, like, socializing and normalizing it that's the gap, is being able to kind of call it out and talk to it. Because, you know, the number of times that I have introduced myself to someone. So what do you do? Oh, you know, I'm a neurodiversity coach. You go, oh my gosh, oh, fascinating. How do you get that? Oh, I'm neurodiverse. Well, I'm neurodiverse. And it's like, we don't want to put it out there. Often, not always, but often, right? And there is that stigma about my children, and people can be, you know, you can always tell when you've got a neuro safe group of parents versus a group of parents that are not ignorant, but that don't know very much about it, because those parents never apologize to each other, because and it's like a village approach to the birthday party. It's just like, hey, put that down. No, hey, we don't eat grass. Put the grass down. Everyone's just correcting everybody's kid. Everyone's just being supportive. But you take that mum or dad with a neurodiverse child, put him in the neurotypical group, and it's like, I'm so sorry. Oh, you know, it's so difficult. I'm so embarrassed. And that's the experience that they have is just, I'm so great. Thank you so much for inviting my child. I'm just so happy that they're here, and I'm going to try and, you know, helicopter parent around them so that they don't, you know, just completely decimate the relationship and don't get invited back ever again.
That's how. And then is for ADHD, for example, is it always medication that is required, or are there other tools you can use to assist?
Look, not always medication, definitely not, right? And, you know, I can say that I've spoken with people who have gone down the medication path, and the reason for that is to try to better manage the impulse control, right? And, you know, and that's fantastic. That's appropriate, right? Yeah. But I've met other people for whom the impulse control isn't an issue as much with their child, and so they don't go down that medication path. And then it's very much let's try to build up the right habits, the right routines. Let's try to build up the right support. Let's approach it from that angle. You know, there is a reluctance. The issue of medication it's such a big question, because I meet people that are criticized for putting their child on medication, and I meet people that are criticized for not putting their child on medication, right? And so it's one of those really, you know, you can be forgiven for thinking you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't, right? But it has a place, and for people for whom it works, it is literally life-changing.
Yeah, like, so the experience that I know of a child, like just a friend of you know, a friend's child, it's the lack of being able to control their emotions. So I think at the beginning of the day it might be okay, but at some point, if there's no medication, it's just emotional, like can be violent, can be angry. And so the medication was needed, she felt, which I know was a big deal for her to even go to. So yeah, I can see why, you know, and obviously that might be more of an extreme case than someone that maybe just fidgets a lot, and maybe they don't need the medication, they just need a squishy or something, you know.
And it's a very personal thing, and that's where it becomes really important to lean on the services that are available. The challenge there, of course, being the wait times in Western Australia, and some of the wait times in Australia are horrendous, right? And there's such a financial burden when you do go private. It's not cheap. It's so expensive to do it, but the impact of when we have the right advice and the right structure and medication when necessary is so great, right? And we're talking about within weeks and months having a sharp turnaround in the classroom where the teacher, where teachers are giving feedback on the children, going, "This is a different child," right? They couldn't, and now they can.
Do you believe that teachers, or is this just a question, are trained to pick up some of these flags in the classroom? For example, when our son needed glasses, the teacher was quite good in pointing out the fact that he needed glasses because she could see that he was struggling with reading some of the text on page. Do you believe there is any training or any kind of responsibility from teachers to inform parents if they see something?
Look, this is such a good question because I think the training that they have is nowhere near adequate. Nowhere near, right? And the result of that is a misinterpretation of what I observe, right? Because you've got on one end of the spectrum, as we talked about, the neurodiverse girls who are much more likely to internalize, who are much more likely to be intensely anxious, right? And versus the boys who are much more likely to be disruptive.
Class clowns.
Right? And, classrooms, we work to the squeaky wheel, right? And so that disruptive child, that can be like a black hole where time goes to die, and the way that can manifest is you can have other parents and other children in the class going, "What is with that guy? Like, come on, can you control your student, please? Like, who are his parents? I want to go talk to his parents. This is nuts." Right? Genuinely frustrated, right? And so, and then if we have a teacher that doesn't have a genuine interest in neurodiversity, who's only done the education who's only done the training and education that they did in university, and hasn't done much beyond that, it's really easy to misinterpret that as poor behavior, as bad intentions, as all those subjective, personalized things that we do with people. And the result being that it becomes a question of discipline, right? As opposed to a question of support and refocusing and helping the child to develop the skills that they need to be able to self-regulate, right? And so to answer your question, there's nowhere near enough training done in that space, and at the same time, there's nowhere near enough resources to be able to deliver on that in the classrooms where we identify that we've got the number of spiky profiles in this class is pretty high, right? That's a difficult room to work with. And if in that onboarding process, right, when mum and dad first came to the school with their kids, if we could identify at that point that we had some spiky profiles, and then structure our classes, our class lists in a certain way so that we don't lump one teacher with 8 out of 30 kids that have impulse control, right? Now, what are we talking about? Now things are, now we're setting our teachers up for success. And if we have the right support mechanisms in place for those teachers, right? Again, that's a success upon success. And then we have the right dynamic and relationship with the parents. It's a circular flow of feedback and communication, and we're all on the same page. And now what we're doing is we're providing consistency to that child.
Beautiful.
And consistency is so critical.
And I guess I'm also really interested in finding out for parents who might have questions or concerns, is there like a checklist, or how do you go about even starting the journey if your gut instinct is telling you one thing or another?
It's a really good question, and I'm in the process of writing one. So what I could do?
Oh, good. Can you send it?
There are there's exceptions to every rule, but what we can do is identify some of the typical behaviors in certain settings with people based on gender, based on age, based on background. If you're seeing these things, then that's a good conversation for you to have. It's a good thing for you to consider that your child might be neurodiverse, and here's some things that you can try to do to support them. And if you find some of these surprisingly effective, then you may have a beautiful neurodiverse child.
Which would be great. And then just bringing it back to you, Michael, you mentioned earlier, like if you'd been diagnosed earlier, you might be in a whole different path, or you would have gone down the road. Do you have regrets about that? Do you wish that had happened?
Look, when I first got diagnosed, yes, right, because I'm the only one of my siblings, only one of 4 children that doesn't have a degree, right, and I'm occasionally reminded of that by my mother.
No, I don't believe that.
Right, and I do. From the outside looking in, university looked like such an incredible experience, right? And now that my 22-year-old's at university, I look at it and go, that is such an amazing thing to go through at a really important time of your formative years, right? And I didn't do that, right? And so I do feel like I missed out to a degree, right? And I do think, I'd love to cook. Could I be the chef? I'm a bit of a musician. Could I probably not a good example, because let's be honest, you don't need to. Right. But where could I have gone? What could I have done? Because I now see that I actually have a really wonderful ability to learn. I just have to learn differently, and when I do learn differently, oh my gosh, I can learn so many things so quickly. But if I'm in a classroom for 8 hours of the day, that's things are going to get messy.
Yes.
Yeah. And did your diagnosis, in the end, when you finally got diagnosed, did it set you free in some ways, like to see yourself differently, accept yourself, and
change your career from where you were to what you have now become?
Yeah. That's a perfect example, right? Like the impact on my professional life has been so significant, right? I am doing work that I dreamt of doing, right? Like, I love, like, the best part of my day was when I got to coach people, when I got to do training facilitation, and it was such a good use of my neurodiverse brain, and so I absolutely love that. In terms of how that impact kind of played out for me, it's one of those things where I have learned to work with it, right? I've learned to accept it, and it wasn't immediate, right? I can see now where the strengths are in my neurodiversity, and I can see now how I can harness it. But it's a never ending. It's like you're practicing forever, because you have to kind of catch yourself falling into some of those behaviors. They kind of go, oh my gosh, yes, I have absolutely fixated. I've been looking at colors for the bedroom wall for the past 90 minutes, right? And maybe I don't need that much time to decide, right? But no, it was such a shocking experience initially, but that phase of, wait a second, what does this mean for me? How do I see myself? How can I make this into a positive experience? I got into that within a few months, and what that meant was I was able to, I guess, almost meet myself for the first time, and see and recognize some of the things that I've struggled with weren't necessarily my fault, and weren't an example of my lack of dedication or lack of interest or lack of knowledge or lack of experience.
Yeah. So you raise your child, and how old is your child now? 11, did you say?
9.
9 years old. And as you're raising your child, and you probably are healing yourself at the same time.
Oh yeah, it absolutely. There was, I have this memory burned into my brain of the time when my 9-year-old said to me, "But Dad, I'm trying so hard." Right. And that was like a sucker punch to the stomach, right? Because at the time I was frustrated and thinking, what, like, I just need you in class on the mat, stop calling out, please. Right. And he said to me, Dad, I'm trying so hard. And I was like, oh my gosh, I was channeling my father just now.
Yeah.
And there's this beautiful boy sitting there not understanding why he isn't able to do the thing that the kid next to him is able to do so easily. And I immediately saw him in me and me in him, and I was like, that was my lived experience. Like that's what it was like. And big hugs and tender words, and me realizing that I really need to check myself when I'm interacting with him, because it's so easy to go down the path of just do better or you're wrong.
I think it's so beautiful.
These neurodiverse kids have heard 20,000 times more that you're wrong, you're bad, you're not doing the right thing. That there's negative messages 20,000 times by the time they're 15.
That's incredible. I just want to say, I think it's just so beautiful that you could recognize that in yourself and recognize him in you and you in him in that moment, and be able to adjust your trajectory. Because as you mentioned, this runs in families, and there's quite likelihood that either your father or uncle or someone else in the family may have felt that way, and through either cultural or social or personal hurdles, they weren't able to perhaps be as open and be as recognizing of that moment within themselves and their child. And as we've seen before in cultural barriers, just said, well, just sit there and just do better, and then just walk away and then just leave it at that. But I think we're quite lucky to be in the country that we are, and wanted to commend you again on being able to be sensitive enough in that moment to recognize that within your son and yourself, because that is a huge change for him in the long term.
And for yourself.
Oh, it is. It is a big self-healing journey, to your point, right? Because you do kind of feel that in a way I'm kind of living vicariously through him, and then seeing my parents in a different light, because it's so easy to judge. It's so easy to judge our parents harshly, even when we become parents ourselves, right? And it's getting the same thing. Are we looking at 1995 or 1985 or 2005 with 2026 goggles on, and so it's so true. And I'm so grateful that I've been able to have this experience, right? And when I talk about it, when I'm doing workshops, when I'm doing presentations, and I talk to other parents about it, and I typically open with some variation on, it's not my intention today to make you regret some of your past decisions and past behaviors, but I'm going to warn you that it is a potential consequence of listening to me, because I'm going to help you to see the world a little bit differently. And you may choose to judge, you may find yourself judging yourself harshly, but please don't, because the fact that it occurs to you to do that means that you're already closing the gap, right?
Yeah.
It means you're already becoming the parent that you could be.
Yeah, that's amazing. And so what's next for you, Michael? You said you've got a checklist that you're working on for people, and a book, or are you just doing more training, coaching?
It's typical ADHD, lots of things going on. But one of the things that I'm that kind of checklist for families to be able to identify some of the behaviors that I'm seeing, and what are some of the things that I can be doing. Because we know that they're one of the most obvious pain points for children, for parents, for families that are neurodiverse, is the school run in the morning, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
That can be almost like a hostage negotiation. Riot.
Yes.
Right? And so building a structure and with some routines that people can just experiment with, can have a go, because there's some really simple things that can really set you up for success, which is great. That onboarding document that I would love to be in every school, in every OSH, in every daycare, in the world, because what it will allow is for a really clean, safe space for us to collaborate, right? That is there's that. And then there's also another piece of what I call the connect piece, which is mapping out that first kind of 100 days of the first year in school, and that communication between excuse me, that communication between school and family, that I can't stress enough, it is such an important relationship. And even when they don't even need to have a neurodiverse child for it to be important, it's such an important relationship. And as I said, it's not, we don't live in a static world anymore. Everything is changing all of the time, and it always has been. But what we now need to do is figure out how we need to change some of the things that we're doing just because they were done before.
Yeah.
The only thing that's constant is change, Michael. Beautifully put. Please send us that checklist. We definitely want to see it. And if the audience wants to reach out, get in touch, questions or training, what's the best way to do so, Michael?
My website, so willfulsteps.com. And yeah, send me questions, queries. I've got there's a page on there where I've got all the different workshops that I run. And there's quite a good mix there. But I also do bespoke workshops where people have a very specific idea of gaps they want to close. I'm happy. I like to collaborate and meet businesses where they are and meet groups where they are to identify what they need and what they need to do. And it's a continuous journey and a continuous conversation. So I'm happy to talk about it. I'm also happy to do the work.
Thank
Great.
you. And thank you for taking the time to answer all of our questions as well and educating us a little bit more.
Oh, it's my absolute pleasure. Oh, I can't tell if we're frozen. Do you still have me?
Are we still there?
Yes.
Yes. Yes, go on.
I was just saying thank you both for having me. I really appreciate it. And I love what you guys are doing with this podcast. It's really fantastic. And
thank you. Look, on the topic of the podcast, we've certainly learned a lot here today. And this is a massive topic, Michael, and I'm certain we're going to get you back on here again. And so thank you again, as Michelle said, for taking time to have this conversation and for sharing your insights.
It's my pleasure. Thank you so much. You're so kind, and I'm really glad to have spent this time with you.
Thank you.
1, 2